If you want to beat the King's Indian defense, stay tuned. This video is for you. Insert transition. Alright, here we go. We're looking at the King's Indian defense from the white point of view. This is using the ChessGoals repertoire. So we see kind of the typical King's Indian defense setup. We're recommending e4 followed by move 5 h3. This move scores very well in practice. I've had a lot of experience with it. And some people have asked, can you show me examples of h3 games? So what we're looking at here, we have Stockfish 14 with the white pieces against Stockfish 13 with the black pieces. This is sort of the beginning of our repertoire position. Black goes e5, we play d5. And now here we see Stockfish 13 going knight a6, followed by a quick knight to c5, putting the immediate pressure on this pawn. So keep in mind, we got Stockfish 13 here playing the black pieces. This is going to be much stronger than any opponents that we're going to face over the board or online unless we face an engine. So now repertoire says to play f3. And after c6, we immediately push ahead with pawn to h4, storming up the king side. Takes, and black plays h5, trying to lock things up. And here we're looking at around a 7/10 of a pawn advantage according to Stockfish. So we see 12 g5, kick in the knight, queen d2, and after f6, black is trying to free the position a little bit when we're going to take back, and this nice move, queen to f2, pointing at this knight on c5, and also guarding the pawn on h4. Very nice move. So here we can expect that black is going to try to expand queenside, and we're going to try to attack kingside. So we see a6, queenside castle, rook to f7. This is kind of a creative move, rook to f7, but the idea is if bishop takes c5, d takes c5, rook f7 is kind of preparing for that by being able to come across the 7th rank. So here the engines are playing a pretty deep line. Neither of them wanted to worry about this free pawn on c5 because in the end black can win h4. So now finally Stockfish goes for it. Takes, queen takes, and we see knight to f8 by black. If black were to go for this pawn, there's a nice move, queen to c6, hitting the rook and the g6 pawn. So we see knight to f8, pawn to d6, and here Stockfish is saying up about 1.2 pawns for white, so slowly increasing the advantage. And now what Stockfish does is they're really going to use this pawn on d6. The pawn on d6 is a huge problem for black, so white can kind of work around this pawn and create other threats, knowing that the d6 pawn is always waiting there. So after knight d5, black regains the pawn. Bishop h3, we see this trade. So black here lost the bishop pair, but they removed that monster knight on d5 that white had. So one thing to kind of keep in mind, if you go back to my video on imbalanced scorecard, kind of always watch these imbalances in the position. So black had the bishop pair, but white had the passed d pawn, the monster knight on d5, and probably the safer king. So black is giving up the bishop pair to slightly improve their own king's safety and get rid of the monster knight. And now we see a very dynamic move by black. So black needs to make something happen, and they're now giving up a pawn on the b file to help get this attack rolling. So we see a few defensive moves by white and a queen trade offer. So now we've transitioned into an endgame, and if you count the pawns, white is up 1 pawn. So after a little bit of maneuvering, white finally breaks with pawn to f4. So this is something that we can learn from. Even though these engines are rated over 3,000, white's not just using the one advantage of the pawn on d6. White is now breaking with f4 to have 2 advantages at once. Right? They're going to try to create, white's going to create some threats on the king side while keeping that strong pawn on d6. So both sides double on the f file. And now look at this. Queen side play by white. So white is playing all over the place, using all of these small advantages and keeping the position very dynamic and playing for the initiative. We can learn from this. e takes f4, rook takes. White's offering a trade of all the rooks, but also what white just set up. Connected passed pawns. These pawns are running. So white eliminates the h-pawn, losing the e-pawn in return, but knows that there is still this pawn on d6 and the two queenside pawns to play with. So look at that. Pawn gets all the way to the 7th rank, and now here we see a nice tactical move, rook to c4. If rook takes d7, there's rook to c6. And let's say black tries to protect that bishop. Rook takes a6. White gave up this isolated passed pawn to now create this new scenario with connected passed pawns. The bishop cutting all the way across, king and knight ready to help out. So that's a very nice transition there. White is willing to give up the d-pawn in order to win the a-pawn. Bishop d8, rook c8, and then here we see it ends up happening. White goes and scoops up the a-pawn. And now we have knight bishop versus knight bishop. And really this comes down to conversion. The white king is perfectly placed, the bishop and knight for white, also ready to help these pawns out. So everything is looking good for white. Bishop d7. Bishop h3, and now the king starts coming up to help. Now we get this scenario, bishop and knight and pawn against bishop and pawn. And in a human versus human game, you know black is probably taking this pawn and forcing the bishop and knight checkmate. And let's just show that even if black takes the pawn, there's really no trouble for white here. How does black even get white to sacrifice a piece for this pawn? You know, sometimes you might get a scenario where it's hard for the knight and bishop to block the pawn, but here it's actually very easy. The knight guards these squares, the bishop guards these squares. It's actually really hard for the king to even get in. The king would have to try to walk all the way around like this just to approach the bishop, which could then be defended by the knight in one move. And we could try that, maybe back in this position. Well, actually, all of these are cut off even. Yeah, it's not very easy at all for the black king to even guard g2. All right, so let's jump back to the game. This pawn pushes. Black sacks that pawn. And white's able to blockade the black bishop, promoting to a queen. And that's the game. So we see here that white went from an opening advantage of around 0.7 or 0.8, according to Stockfish 14, playing the white pieces, slowly just kept increasing that advantage throughout the game. Like at this point, white's looking at the c5 knight as kind of the target, ready to push the d-pawn, castle's queen side, and really I liked how the Stockfish 14 was able to shift gears a few times there, find different weaknesses. After queen takes c5, d6. Let's kind of watch this again. Yeah, black sacrifices that pawn. So here, let's say black doesn't sacrifice the pawn. Let's go queen b6. Oh, now the e5 pawn drops. All right, so what if bishop back? That's also a blunder, f4. So see, white's kind of ready for everything here. f4 is a very strong threat. Let's say this, trying to guard. So what I'm doing here, you guys can do in your own games too. So let's say you want to learn how do you play the King's Indian defense for white out of this ChessGoals repertoire. Try exactly what I'm doing. Give black a few moves that you think like, okay, my opponent may play this, or I'm not sure what to do with that. And then look at what the engine does. So bishop g3, I'm trying to guard f4 and guard e5. Knight to e2 is the move. And if bishop f4, we have knight takes, pawn takes, or rook takes are both bad because these pawns are connected. So really here, black played b4, but I don't see anything better. Let's say queen to f6. So this is a Stockfish suggestion. There's a move rook to h2. And that rook is coming over to c2. Yeah, just very nice advantage for white. So I'll put some links in the description below. This is coming from our ChessGoals classical 1d4 repertoire, and we are recommending this h3 system out of the kid, which tends to lead to this position. In the game, Stockfish went for a quick c6 and capture, but a lot of times black won't go for that, and they'll play for knight f8, f5, but when this pawn's on g4 and black plays f5, it's almost always a mistake for black to play f5. And maybe in a future video I'll have to show some examples of that. What happens if black plays for an f5 break, even when the computer doesn't like it, and just kind of show the follow through. What can white do to punish that early f5? So let me know what you guys think of this type of video in the description. Do you want to see more of these Stockfish versus Stockfish videos out of the opening repertoires, or would you rather see human examples? Because we could analyze master games as well. Yeah, I think those could be just as instructive. Alright, thanks for watching. Please give this video a like. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And we have links in the description below if you want to join ChessGoals. It would be great to have you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.